It's about stripping women, especially black women, of dignity, autonomy, and peace. So no, this isn't an episode of The Handmaid's Tale. This is America in 2025.
America is now literally turning into The Handmaid's Tale, according to the latest fake horror story that's spreading like wildfire on TikTok. We're going to break down TikTok's grotesque distortion and politicization of a horrifying tragedy in Georgia. Plus, woke education in San Francisco is actually beyond parody, and some MAGA influencers lash out after a major court ruling. All this and so much more is coming up on today's episode of the Barad vs. Everyone podcast, my daily show where we take on the craziest ideas from across the internet, our politics, and our media, all from an independent perspective. Up first, we've got to talk about a really tragic story in Georgia that is unfortunately being politicized and just spread with extreme hyperbole and really misleading fashion on TikTok, of all places, unsurprisingly, painting a narrative that America is now the Handmaid's Tale. I'm going to play you a video from massive TikTok star Spence Waugh, where he describes the story, how he sees it, well, then we'll go over the facts later, and how it basically means the Handmaid's Tale has come to America. Take a listen.
Well, it looks like you no longer need a Hulu subscription to watch The Handmaid's Tale anymore. Just book a flight to Georgia and you can watch it all unfold in real time. A 30-year-old nurse, Adriana Smith, was declared brain dead over 3 months ago. She's still on life support, though. Why? Because she's pregnant. This isn't some dystopian fiction. This is Georgia's abortion law in action. And what's even more terrifying is this exact same scenario happens in season 3, episode 9 of The Handmaid's Tale. Down to the details. A handmaid, someone forced to give birth, loses too much blood, she's declared brain dead, and the state keeps her body alive just to use it as an incubator. This is no longer just a dystopian concept. This is Georgia's law. Adriana had blood clots in her brain. Her family says the hospital ignored her symptoms. They didn't do a CT scan and then discharged her with meds. The next morning, she collapsed and was pronounced brain dead. And now, Georgia's so-called heartbeat law has turned her body into state property. Because she's not at risk anymore, she's just dead. But not dead enough for the law. Doctors are legally required to keep her body breathing against her family's wishes until the fetus, which is currently 21 weeks old, reaches viability at 32 weeks. That's 11 more weeks of machines, trauma for her family, and escalating hospital bills. And who's gonna pay for those bills? The state? And this is all for a fetus that doctors are already saying might not even survive. The fetus has fluid in the brain, so when he's born, he can be born stillborn, he might be wheelchair bound, he might be blind. But none of that matters to the lawmakers who wrote the heartbeat law. Because choice was never the point. Under normal circumstances, the family, or Adriana's own medical wishes, would guide this decision. This isn't a miracle. This is a medically enforced hostage situation. Her body isn't hers anymore. It belongs to the state. All because a handful of extremist men want to play God. The same state who let her walk out of a hospital with no CT scans, with doctors who didn't listen to her, are now demanding her corpse be left viable and functioning for 4 more months. Governor Brian Kemp and the lawmakers who passed this law, they should be forced to sit with Adriana's family every single day and explain why their daughter's death is now a political stunt. Let's stop pretending this is about life. It's about power. It's about punishment. It's about stripping women, especially black women, of dignity, autonomy, and peace. So no, this isn't an episode of The Handmaid's Tale. This is America in 2025.
So this video has almost 10 million views, and the outpouring of horror on TikTok, video after video like this about this story in Georgia, is overwhelming. And it all comes back to how The Handmaid's Tale and how America is now like The Handmaid's Tale. But the problem, guys, is that most of that video is objectively factually false. It wildly distorts this situation beyond belief and totally politicizes something that is really a very complicated and heartbreaking medical tragedy, but not a clear-cut political issue in any way. First, they keep saying that this woman is being held hostage or kept alive against her family's wishes, but that is not true. There is no information available on what this woman's wishes were for afterlife care, but there is actually no reason to believe that she would want to be taken off life support if it meant that her baby would certainly die, which it would. And I should also just say that the very serious issues about potential malpractice or mistreatment or failure to diagnose this woman exist and are very valid and should absolutely be investigated, but it's kind of a separate issue than the tragic story of this pregnancy that we're talking about with this TikTok narrative. And they keep saying that this is against the family's wishes, that she's being kept alive as a hostage. That is not true. The family has not asked for her to be taken off life support based on any available public information. Her family has even said in interviews that they might want to keep the baby alive and have the baby and raise the baby. So it is objectively, factually false to claim that she's being kept alive, against everyone's wishes, when in fact, that's not the case. At least we don't know that that's the case at all. But I'm going to get to the huge problem here that is just totally inaccurate, where they're connecting this to Georgia's abortion law after this. Have you ever thought about being a YouTuber? It's a daunting prospect, but it's also the most rewarding thing I've ever done professionally. Key to the success of any great YouTube channel is, of course, the content, but also great thumbnails. And thanks to today's sponsor, Opus Clip, you no longer need to hire an expensive thumbnail designer to get started. Their new feature, Opus Clip Thumbnail, is a one-click AI thumbnail generator. Users simply paste in an unlisted or public video link, and they extract key information to automatically generate personalized, high-performing thumbnails. This transforms a process that can take hours or even days into one that takes minutes and is completely free. For example, I put in a clip from one of my podcasts from a few weeks ago where I discussed the arson attack on Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro and implore people to set politics aside and condemn the violence. It came up with this really cool thumbnail just minutes later. Head to the link on screen and in the description to get started and check out this cool new feature from Opus Clip and all their other services that make getting started in content creation easier than ever before. Check it out now, you'll be glad you did. So Spencer did this in his video, and a lot of the news coverage has done this as well, and almost all of the TikTok Handmaid's Tale videos are making this about Georgia's heartbeat law that bans abortion after, I believe, 6 weeks. It's a very strict abortion law. I'm not endorsing that law. Set aside your personal feelings on it. It is not relevant to this case. It does not apply to this case. Taking a woman off life support is not considered an abortion under the law, even if it did result in the baby's death, because it's not a procedure taken for the purposes of terminating a pregnancy, like administering abortion medication or conducting a surgical abortion. You don't have to take my word for this. The state attorney general has explicitly on the record clarified this. Attorney General Chris Carr's communications office issued a statement saying, "There is nothing in the Life Act that requires medical professionals to keep a woman on life support after brain death. Removing life support is not an action with the purpose to terminate a pregnancy." They added that their prayers go out to the woman's family. So all of this narrative being spread that this is required by Georgia's abortion law isn't true. They have on the record confirmation from the highest levels of the state government that the law does not stop them from taking them off life support if they so choose. And the family hasn't actually publicly said that they want that to happen. But the narrative being spread like wildfire on TikTok is that Republicans are now enslaving women's corpses, holding them hostage after death to be baby incubators in defiance of their family's wishes. None of that is true. Now, I'm not saying that that means it is the right thing to do to keep her alive, or that I would judge the family if they made a different decision. I personally would not. I think it's a heartbreaking and incredibly complex situation, but facts matter. And so many of these young people on TikTok and so many of these influencers just spread the most wild and extreme radical misinformation and false narratives about how stuff works. And then you wonder why young people reach such extreme conclusions and start supporting political violence and adopting extremist positions. It's like, well, maybe because they're convinced of things that are not true, that the world is literally becoming the Handmaid's Tale when, while this is an incredibly messy and complicated and horrifying situation in a lot of ways, it is not the same situation as portrayed in The Handmaid's Tale, not even close. I want to read you guys something from a National Review article about this story. Wesley J. Smith writes that the law is one thing, but doing what is right is another. Consider that Adriana is not being harmed, her baby's life is precious, The baby will be viable in the next several weeks. Potential disability does not make the baby's life less important. We allow the bodies of people declared dead by neurological criteria to be maintained for organ donation, so why not gestation? Both are gifts of life. The crucial question is consent. Would Adriana have wanted her death to kill her child? There is nothing to indicate in the story that she would. In this regard, note that the family has not decided whether to remove life support, so the media's huffing and puffing about Georgia's abortion ban is misplaced. The story doesn't mention the father. When the baby is born, he should be required to help support or perhaps be awarded custody, depending on whether that is in the best interest of the child. So I am not necessarily endorsing this perspective that actually keeping her alive is the right thing to do to save the life of the baby. I think it's incredibly messy and complicated, obviously. I think it's a heartbreaking situation, but I include this perspective to simply point out that it is not whatsoever the black and white issue of course, this is obviously evil to do this, that the TikTok influencers, the Spensoirs of the world are making it out to be. It's actually a really complicated philosophical and moral debate where I can see a strong argument in either way, but especially when the facts are ambiguous and murky, as they are in this case, the bold narrative these TikTok influencers are pushing about this dystopian outcome and how obviously horrifying and immoral it is just totally unjustified. And to me, a really irresponsible way to use your platform. But it gets people like this 10 million views. I mean, that roughly translates to somewhere between, I don't know, $3,000 to $7,000 for him from that one video that Spencer put out with this wildly distorted picture of events unfolding in Georgia. To be clear, there are many legitimate criticisms to be made of Georgia's heartbeat bill, the way it's written, what exceptions it does and doesn't have, and there's a very complicated debate to be had about abortion in general. I'm not telling you guys what the right and wrong thing to believe is on all of that. I'm simply pointing out that once again, TikTok is spreading hyper-partisan, hyper-alarmist misinformation about stories that are actually not anywhere near so black and white. That's why I am just once again begging people to not get their news exclusively from TikTok, because that's a part of why we've ended up with a young generation with so many people who are hopelessly misinformed and deeply radicalized, because some of the things that are radicalizing them sound so horrible and are so terrible, but aren't actually happening, or at least aren't happening in the way they're being portrayed online. But what do you guys think? Do you disagree with me? Have you seen the panicked and alarmist discussion of this story online? I want to hear from you guys, definitely in the comment section. I do take the time to read the comments. I can't read them all, but I spend a good amount of time looking. So definitely comment with your thoughts, and please do make sure you're subscribed if you aren't yet, and do hit that like button while you're at it. Remember, guys, you can check out the merch line with the Your Delulu is showing and the On My Last Brain Cell items, plus subscribe to my second channel. I just dropped a response over on that channel to a trans YouTuber who called me out and said, I quote, biological male is a anti-trans dog whistle. Yes, that's a real quote. I just responded to her and dropped that on my second channel, so make sure you're subscribed over there. And remember to send me voice notes for my Friday episodes with your woke horror stories or your messy personal scenarios or situations that you want my advice on. I've been getting so many interesting ones. Love hearing from you guys, and I'm excited to do more Friday episodes responding to them. But the link to send those is in the description. Okay, up next, we've got to talk about a story coming out of California that is beyond parody. It actually sounds like something the Babylon Bee would have come up with to make fun of woke people or absurd progressive bubbles in California, but it is real life. Basically, the San Francisco Unified School District, so the public school district in San Francisco, California, was pushing forward this plan to reimagine schooling in the name of equity that was so insane. It was so anti-meritocratic. It was the dumbing down of education beyond belief and beyond parity that they got tremendous pushback, and that they're finally actually delaying and canceling this plan. But I just have to bring you guys in on the details, because I thought we left some of this stuff behind in 2020, 2021, and the madness of that era, but apparently we did not. So the San Francisco Standard reports that the San Francisco Unified School District is delaying its Grading for Equity initiative, the superintendent said Wednesday, after the proposal sparked a furious backlash and accusations that public schools are lowering the bar for students. And by accusations, guys, they just mean factual observations, because that is unambiguously and objectively exactly what this proposal was doing. The core components of the proposed grading approach include allowing students to retake tests, excluding factors like lateness, effort, and participation from final grades. Excluding lateness, effort, and participation from the grades? What's even left? And omitting classwork and homework from grading and basing 100% of the grade on summative testing, according to an SFUSD staff report. So no more grading based on horrifically problematic things like effort, and instead only grading based on tests, like standard quarterly tests or what have you, that they are also allowed to retake at any time, and I guess however many times they feel like. So basically just abolish grades is the take here, I guess. And that's supposed to promote equity? I mean, sure, in the sense that people will be more equitably dumb and terribly educated. I mean, I guess that's more equitable. It's just also worse. The initiative was aiming to make grading practices more accurate, bias-resistant, and motivational. Please explain to me how taking away any bonus points for effort makes something more motivational. The math is not mathing. It's giving Common Core. The district has budgeted $172,000 for a consulting group to develop this plan, pending Board of Education approval. Ah, yes, I see. It all makes sense now. Somebody's cousin or somebody's sister or somebody's wife runs a consulting DEI equity education group that's about to get a big fat check to design this absurdity. Suddenly, it all makes sense. The policy was first reported Tuesday by Voice of San Francisco, prompting an immediate wave of online criticism, including from Silicon Valley Rep. Ro Khanna, Mayor Daniel Lurie, and many parents who argued that the district is deprioritizing academic rigor. By argued, you mean observed, again. And it's kind of telling that even these progressive politicians, Ro Khanna is a left-wing Democrat, the mayor is presumably also a left-wing Democrat, are like, no, this goes way too far. Stop the insanity. My immigrant dad asked me where the missing 10% went when I scored a 90, Khanna tweeted. He said giving A's to more students is not equity, it betrays the American dream and every parent who wants more for their kids. Based parenting. And look, his son turned out to be a member of Congress representing Silicon Valley. So something tells me that approach seems to have worked and works pretty well for the Asian American community in general. They do not do every kid gets a trophy in parenting, and yet their outcomes seem to be significantly above average, not somehow horrifically bad and terrible and in need of more equity. So a few more details on this. For the 2025 to 2026 school year, SFUSD planned to include 14 high schools and 65 to 70 teachers in a pilot program. Each teacher sees 100 to 150 students daily, meaning the initiative could affect more than 10,000 students in its first year. Thank God this is getting delayed, but it should not just be delayed. It should be canceled, and the people pushing it should be driven out of education, because clearly, maybe they need to be staff at an emotional support puppy program or something, because obviously, empathy and kindness are virtues in, like anything, I guess it's a question of dose. Too much of it becomes a poison, but they clearly are not cut out for education. And the fact that this was going to go forward until all this pushback and hundreds of thousands of dollars were going to be potentially corruptly or suspectly funneled to consultants over it. I mean, it's just a microcosm of a much bigger problem, which is the ideological rot, which is the equity over merit mindset that has captured a lot of the Democratic Party's base and its core voters and most ideologically committed members. It's not actually something that your rank and file Democrat approves of, your average person, particularly like your average minority that maybe votes for Democrats, but the hardcore base. the MSNBC diehard viewers, the people who have advanced degrees in political science and education from some left-wing college. They really have gone in on this stuff, hook, line, and sinker, and it's cancerous. It is an ideological cancer that is anathema to excellence and merit and what the spirit of education should actually be. We should be trying to help kids catch up who are struggling. I support that, but not trying to bring everyone else down so that it's more equitable. That's the difference between equity and equality. Equity sounds nice, but in practice can actually be an evil concept. When they're like, how could you possibly oppose DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion? Aren't those all good things? Actually, with equity, no. Equity exists in contrast to equality. The two are not synonyms. They are, if anything, often opposites. Equality is a virtue. Equality of access and opportunity, but not equity of outcomes, treating everyone the same and trying to force and socially engineer people to all end up in the same place rather than letting them rise and fall on their merit and maybe helping people who fall behind or who struggle in different ways, but without dragging everyone else down. That's the fundamental problem with this mindset. I just find this stuff absolutely mortifying, and I think the Democratic Party is going to really struggle until it publicly repudiates all of this madness and roots it out from every level of its political parties, its supporters, its institutions, its affiliated groups, all of it. Get it out, because I'm telling you right now, the majority of the American people will never be on board with this insanity. But what do you guys think? Are you surprised? Have you encountered this kind of stuff in your kid's school district? Definitely let me know. Also, you can send me in a voice note and tell me about it. I would love to hear from y'all about that. Up next, some big name MAGA influencers and White House officials are lashing out and crashing out after a huge court decision just went against the Trump administration on its tariffs and trade wars. Here's some coverage from CNBC about the big decision that was just handed down.
This really significant news overnight as the Court of International Trade struck down the tariffs that the president has imposed for reasons of economic emergency. And as you said, that has been most of what we've seen so far this term. So a 3-judge panel ruled unanimously that the statute he used, known as IEEPA, does not grant the president the authority to impose as broad of tariffs as we've seen. They wrote that IEEPA does not give unbounded tariff authority to the president and that the statute can only be used for unusual and extraordinary threats. They said they don't believe the trade deficit fits that definition. So the ruling will impact all the tariffs Trump has imposed this term against Canada, Mexico, and China. Also impacts the 10% baseline tariff on all nations and those so-called reciprocal tariffs on other trading partners. So the court essentially gave the administration 10 calendar days to implement this ruling and stop collecting the tariffs. Now, the White House did already file plans to appeal. It will also separately have to ask for an administrative stay in order to keep the tariffs in place for now. We are very likely to see that in the next few days as well. And a White House spokesman, meantime, rebuking the court last night, saying that, quote, it is not for unelected judges to decide how to properly address a national emergency, and that, quote, the administration is committed to using every lever of executive power to address the crisis of non-reciprocal trade and deficits.
So this ruling was handed down by a 3-judge panel, and the judges on there include one Obama appointee, one Reagan appointee, and one Trump appointee. So it is an ideologically and politically diverse group of judges, but they all unanimously agreed that the Trump administration's attempt to institute tariffs unilaterally without Congress passing legislation, just all via executive order, these huge across-the-board tariffs, is unlawful. Why? Well, because the Constitution explicitly gives Congress the right to levy taxes and tariffs, not the president. Reading from the decision here. The Constitution assigns Congress the exclusive powers to, quote, lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises, and to regulate commerce with foreign nations. The question in the 2 cases before the court is whether the International Emergency Economic Powers Act of 1977 delegates these powers to the president in the form of authority to impose unlimited tariffs on goods from nearly every country in the world. The court does not read IEEPA, that law, to confer such unbounded authority and sets aside the challenged tariffs imposed thereunder. Now, the law that the court is referencing here is a federal statute that delegates some of Congress's tariff authority to the president to take targeted steps to specifically address a pressing urgent national emergency. But, and this is again from the court decision, IEEPA further provides that these authorities may only, quote, be exercised to deal with an unusual and extraordinary threat with respect to which a national emergency has been declared for purposes of this chapter and may not be exercised for any other purpose. So this law had never previously been invoked to justify unilateral tariffs and is only supposed to be used to address specific urgent national emergencies. But Trump tried to use it to impose blanket tariffs on almost every good from almost every country. The court said, you actually can't do that. If you want those tariffs, you have to get them passed through Congress, which then it would be legitimate and they would likely be upheld. The Trump administration tried to justify the national emergency argument based on saying that the trade deficit, the fact that we export more goods than import, is a national emergency, urgent, that requires these steps to redress it. But we've had a trade deficit for decades. It's not a new problem. It's not a pressing problem. And the same is true for some of the other national emergencies they tried to invoke, like fentanyl coming over from Canada. The tariffs really don't do much to address that and are, again, applied to lots of different countries, not just even narrow to that scope. So this goes far beyond the scope of that federal law, which is supposed to give just limited authorization, yet the Trump administration tried to just use it as a blanket authorization to do unilateral across-the-board global tariffs all by itself. That's not how the Constitution works. That is illegal, and it is unconstitutional, and these judges are correct in their decision, in my view. But some very prominent MAGA personalities are lashing out and making claims of a judicial coup because of this ruling. For example, White House Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller tweeted, "We are living under judicial tyranny," in response to this ruling. The popular MAGA account Cat Turd tweeted after this news, "Judicial activist commies will not win." Charlie Kirk tweeted, "In a sweeping new ruling, the U.S. Court of International Trade has just blocked President Trump's Liberation Day tariffs, saying that authority is with Congress. With activist judges, what is even the point of having a president?" Charlie then posts a fact check, which cites the incorrect law. It doesn't cite the appropriate law that Trump actually imposed the tariffs under. So I find this pushback absurd. The courts specifically exist to rule on the legality and constitutionality of executive actions and to reinforce the separation of powers. That's what they did here. Trump tried to go too far. He tried to do stuff by himself because he couldn't get it passed through Congress like he's supposed to. And they said, hey, no, you can't do that. That's not a judicial coup. They're not taking over the tariff power for themselves and saying, no, only judges can impose tariffs now. The Constitution be damned. No, well, to be clear, some of the complaints about judicial activism or obstruction may ring true in other cases. In this case, it absolutely does not. They are properly enforcing the separation of powers and doing the exact role that this court for trade was created by Congress to do. And they're not commie judges. This is a Trump appointee, a Reagan appointee, and an Obama appointee. And you're saying, what, did Trump appoint commie judges, really, just because they disagree with something he's doing? If anything, to me, that makes it more credible that Trump is wrong on the law. If it was all Democratic appointed judges, maybe you could say, well, they're just biased against Trump. But you've got an across the board spectrum here, still ruling against the president. Maybe that should prompt a little bit of introspection from these MAGA influencers that maybe dear leader isn't always perfect and might actually be in the wrong this time. Now, you guys know that I am generally pretty opposed to tariffs, but if Trump goes about it the right way, if he gets Congress to pass a bill enacting these tariffs and signs it into law, then I'll still disagree with it on the merits, but I won't have any legal objection to it. And I don't think that in that case, in that scenario, a legal challenge would succeed. I think the judges would uphold it. And if somehow the judicial activists still blocked it, even after he went through the correct process, then maybe you would have some credible claims about judicial activism or obstruction. But that's not the case here. And I think it's irresponsible for these MAGA influencers to delegitimize federal courts and smear them when they're just doing their jobs and faithfully upholding our Constitution as it is written. But what do you guys think? Do you somehow agree with Charlie Kirk, Stephen Miller, and Cat Turd? Yeah, do let me know in the comments. I'm always open to different opinions and to disagreements. Make sure you hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't yet. And with that, that'll be it for this episode of the Brad vs. Everyone podcast. Thank you to Opus Clip for sponsoring. Remember to check out the merch, send in voice notes, subscribe to my second channel, yada, yada, yada. And with that, we'll talk again real soon.